panel is going to be on women in technology, and this panel is going to be moderated by Haima. It gives me great pleasure to invite Haima to the stage, and she'll invite the moderator, the panelists.
Thank you all for being here, and welcome to the GTEN conference. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And also welcome to the panel today on Women in Tech. So I can tell you that women working in tech would much rather focus on the tech part of their identity than the gender. But really, the sort of the elephant in the room, if you will, is the fact that there are so few women in tech, and certainly fewer of them in leadership positions. And so, in a way, it's really hard to sort of separate the two identities. So I'm going to have a really awesome panel today, and there's a really young entrepreneur as well, which I'm really excited to introduce to you all. But a quick poll from the audience: how many of you are founders or entrepreneurs in the companies? Fabulous. And how many would like to start their company, are thinking of doing pitches? Fabulous. And how many in career tracks who are working in companies? Great. So a quick introduction, myself, Haima Menath. I am CEO and co-founder of Talking Cranes. I work with companies to diversify the talent pool and to sort of help them create better internal working cultures. And if we're all in the Valley, and in the last few years, if you've been here, you know that that's a big problem in the Valley, just in terms of gender inclusion, in terms of race, in terms of orientation. There's a lot of conversations happening about how to create better cultures. And we are all, in a way, people of color, and part of what we bring to the table is also part of our background and part of our heritage in leadership skills, in things that we can bring a lot of value to the companies that we're founding and being part of. So that's one perspective. So one of the things that I get to talk to the clients that I meet is something called unconscious bias. It's probably a term that you've heard about, being again, in the Valley. Unconscious bias is really about having, stereotypes, having implicit bias of attitudes that are not particularly accurate, right? And one of the reasons why an unconscious bias sort of happens is, studies show that within the first sort of 7 seconds of meeting another person, you make at least 11 judgment calls about them. So if you think about it, you make judgment calls as soon as you meet somebody on whether, what their background is, what's their social status, what is their language that they speak perhaps, what is their, economic status, what is their educational background. So all of these things are what you call like thin slice decision making that you make as soon as you meet a person. And so I would say, for example, even before I started talking to you, having seen me, maybe the way I dress, maybe, my hair, maybe the way I'm talking, you've already made decisions about me. And I would say, and studies show, that it would take at least 10 interactions of the opposite kind for you to actually change your mind about any of those. So those are, really strong indications of, what bias is and what it can do. In many ways, there are good reasons why bias helps you, because, you're sort of immediately trying to make the thin slice decision and it helps you. But in a lot of times it does not. So I'll leave it there, and I'm going to introduce the panel today. And I will start with actually our youngest entrepreneur, Sumaira Mehta. Come on in and tell us.
Take the notebook. My name is Samira Metha. I'm 11 years old, and I'm the CEO and founder of Coder Bunnies and Coder Minds, both board games intended towards teaching kids the concepts of computer programming and artificial intelligence. I have a goal, and my goal is to help all the 1 billion kids in the world get access to STEM and coding tools by the time I go to college, which is around 2030. And to make that possible, I've been doing workshops at places like libraries, schools, tech events, companies like Google, Microsoft, Intel, Facebook, and others. And I'm doing workshops of my game so I can get more and more girls and kids overall into coding. And I've been doing girls-only workshops because I believe that girls are underrepresented in the tech and computer science field. So it is my goal to bring more girls into tech and create a more equal tech world. So I've been doing girls-only workshops. I've been fortunate enough to receive national and international recognition, and I'm very excited to be here in this panel today. Thank you.
My next panelist is Preeti Padmanabhan. Come on up and tell us who you are and what you do.
Hi everyone. How many of you were here last year? Okay, so we had the first Women in Tech panel last year, and really excited to be here today, and appreciate Lena and Prakash inviting us back to do a Women in Tech panel. So my name is Preeti Padmanabhan. I'm the VP of Marketing at a startup called Panzura, based in Campbell. And I also got into angel investing about 6 months ago with Portfolio, which is an angel funding group focused on women entrepreneurs, as well as SV2, which is Silicon Valley Social Venture Fund, focused on impact investments. Recently I got invited to join the Indian Mafia, which is basically Thai, as a charter member. One of the key goals that I have as part of all the efforts that I do is to increase the number of women that are being involved in these initiatives. There are a lot of women that are doing great things in the world, and we appreciate all these opportunities to showcase what they do. Thank you.
My next panelist is Madhu Iyer. Come on up. Welcome, Madhu, and I hear you've been here many times, so yeah. But I would love to know a little bit more about you, and certainly the audience would too.
Hi everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Prakash and Veena for putting this together, and everybody in ATIA, all the members here, the operating members, who do such a fantastic job year after year. I've been here before, speaking about data science and, and not really a woman in technology kind of a talk, but I'm from technology, so it's implied. Right now, I'm currently as advisor to startups and some VCs. I have a data science background. I've been a data scientist for the last 17 years. And before the data science word was coined by a gentleman down the road in LinkedIn. I've worked at a think tank out of Stanford called Exponent in Menlo Park as a senior scientist, looking at problems at Apple, glass failures, and looking at various other product analytics problems in early 2000s. And then I was at Intuit. I was one of their first R&D data science people. I also, founded an incubated product within Intuit called QuickBooks Financing, where lending was just new, and so we started lending from the QuickBooks data pool that we had, and I'd kind of put that together. Was at various startups, including a unicorn startup in Singapore called Gojek. I was their chief data officer and on the board of directors. Raised about $550 million I started their Singapore office. And came back here, and I was in a really late stage Series B, C startup, real estate technology, funding startup, in San Francisco, and I was the chief data officer as well. And for the last year or so, I've just been sort of, figuring out exciting things that are happening, blockchain, artificial intelligence as it applied to many different fields, and I advise startups and also advise VCs. That's my background.
Super exciting. Kripa, our next panelist. Kripa Natarajan, right? Yes.
Thank you, Haima. After those three, I really need to cook up something nice to say about myself. I'll try to do something on the fly here. Really honored to be here. My name is Kripa Natarajan. Thank you for the opportunity, everybody. I'm in the panel here. I currently head products for a startup called Pexata. If anybody familiar with data preparation as a space? Great. So we created this market in terms of data preparation, and I had a very innovative product team and the user experience team. And what we do is deliver a technology that has a lot of intelligence and AI built in, so it can enable business analysts to essentially interact and work with their data with visual clicks and be able to do the stuff that data engineers and data scientists are able to do with coding, and makes the product very, very easy enough that even my husband can use it. So that's the kind of technology that we're building here. He's not here. He has a proxy though. Personally for me, I really enjoy problem solving. And the core essence of being in product management and in leading products and technology, especially when we're initiating and ideating something and then bringing it to fruition and to the market, which is the passion that most of you have as entrepreneurs, is with identifying where a problem is. It starts with really looking under the hood and saying that's a problem that needs solving, and here's an innovative way to solve it. And that's what I enjoy, and that's been my journey in product management for well over a decade. Happy to be here and participate in this discussion. Thank you.
So we have women in product, data scientists, and an entrepreneur here to share experiences. So Preeti, I'm actually going to start with you. It's a really interesting time, right, to be in product and to lead product. And you're in product marketing, right? So given everything that's going on in technology in terms of AI and blockchain and especially AI, in terms of the sort of exploding data, right, and in terms of the cloud management services you're in, talk a little bit about how that is really changing strategy of data management, and also talk about from a product standpoint, where do you think are the opportunities for entrepreneurs? Where do you think the horizon is?
So, like Madhu was mentioning earlier, the whole science behind data is not new. It was there way before the term was coined, and data management was happening way before it was coined. I think what we are here today is, what we are dealing with is in terms of the distributed data. Right? In terms of how the data is across so many different locations, what we are seeing with our customers is that they have difficulty in managing the data and collaborating with the data between all the different clouds, be it the public, private, hybrid, all those architectures. I was on a call with one of the top analyst firms this morning, and some of the issues they're talking about is, even though we have come so far, still the questions on data management and managing the data across clouds is cost savings. Customers are still not able to actually get the best cost because they have, like, the data is exploding on a, like, whatever, every year, the number of data that we have, it's at least, you can correct me, I think by the end of, by 2020, the amount of data that is generated is going to be 10 times more than what it was 5 years ago. So literally it's exploding, so customers have to deal with that whole, not only data management on where the data lies, but in terms of cost of the data. So coming to your question on what can entrepreneurs do, I think one of the areas is to make sure that, in terms of edge computing, in terms of making the data available at wherever the customers are located, where they want, when they want it, as well as thinking about innovative ways by which they can actually reduce the cost for the customer. So those are a couple of areas that we are doing in our company, and those would be some areas where there could be opportunities for innovation.
I can add to that. We are living in a time when really information is available at the speed of thought, right? And it's an anomaly that right now, as individuals and as consumers, we have information available to us at the speed of thought. We could say, hey Google, how long it's going to take for me to get to work, or how much does Jeff Bezos make, or Alexa, where's my order, and so on. But that is not available to the enterprise if you think about it. It's very, very hard for a VP of marketing to say, hey, what's my pipeline prediction looking like? Or for a CEO to go in there and say, what is my opportunity looking like? So we're actually living in an age where, as a consumer, as an individual, we have access to information at the speed of thought, but enterprises are far behind in terms of their ability to do so. Many of you can relate to that in your everyday jobs. So there's a lot of opportunity to be had. There's a lot of data. There's a lot of information that can be tapped into it. And essentially, that is the key opportunity that we have lying in front of us, to be able to extend that and be able to do that at literally the speed of thought.
Madhu, I'd love your perspective, but before that I want to ask you, what was it like to be a CDO in a unicorn?
It was, it's not for everybody, I'll tell you that. I think, I think it's always very difficult to build companies. And at any stage, as a founder, when you come in, and I was not a founder in the unicorn, it's a different stage. And when you're in a hyper growth stage, which was Series B, C, D, and beyond that I've been, it's a lot of pressure to do the exact kinds of things that the panelists have been talking about. Preeti has said that, and I think you also hit it, that, it's very, very important to be able to grow at levels that are exponential, and to manage that and mitigate the risks every day is certainly not for everyone. There are different stages, and so I think there's an early stage founder entrepreneur, there's a later stage founder entrepreneur, and same goes with building products and thinking about data and thinking about that entire scale. And so there is definition of problems, and then there is management of scale and growth. And I've actually done both in my career. At Intuit, where I've done the definition of the problem, where we had a lot of data, and we wanted to get into lending because Cabbage and OnDeck and all of these other people were coming in 2009, 2010 Lending Club. That was a definition of a problem, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs here who might be in that stage you're ideating, and then you're building something. And then growth is a completely different beast. And then of course there are pivots then too, and then you have to do the pivot along with managing the scale of the monster that you've already grown. Opportunities are many. I come from the perspective that AI needs to be used. That entire word, has to be used very carefully. There's just a lot of information now. Lots of applications, but the applications has to be pretty careful. When I say that, I think that a lot of people throw deep learning at problems that are not required, and we can talk about the applications, and I don't want to, kind of hijack the conversation to that. But yes, different scales, different levels of startups. All different, and I've had the pleasure of being on both ends of the spectrum. And of course, it's extremely challenging to be able to identify problems, but it's also extremely challenging to be able to scale the problem.
Let me have the mic on with you again, just to follow up on that, and then I'll come to Samena. So one of the concerns, in terms of using data in machine learning and AI is also the sort of the tainted data, right? That's getting into applications that we really don't know what the outcome is going to be, given that human beings are imperfect. I was just talking about unconscious bias, earlier. So in many ways, we also want to be careful about not codifying all of those things into our systems, right? So as a data scientist, how concerned are you about what's the training data that's getting into our our applications? It just seems to be a really sort of humongous problem. And if we only have engineers and scientists looking at it, and not, others, right? Like philosophers, historians, people for whom these things are really going to impact, right, in a biased standpoint. How do we kind of, navigate that part of it from a data scientist point of view?
I was attending the and not to throw names here, but I was in the World Economic Forum Chief Data Officer Summit in early January. And one of the biggest points of discussion in that CDO summit was different things. It's not just business applications, but it's how does data get used for minding our oceans. How does these are like larger conversations, and I think underlying all of this is garbage in, garbage out, which I think people have heard all the time. There's so many applications. There's so many Big Brother kind of things that you can do. Certain countries that have a lot of data are happy to do it. And so we have to be careful, and I think even for business you have to be very careful. Credit scores that are being computed, that are really, it's a B2B application, but it affects all of us. It's a B2B2C, and there's a lot of things that are being used which right now are getting added on as a result of data being available so readily. So it's a very sort of it's an impervious thing now. We have to be careful. There are discussions going on about how do we kind of think about this entire problem, and also to your point about just engineers and scientists being in a silo and just kind of codifying and doing all kinds of algorithms without the subject matter experts not being there. I don't know if that's a bad thing, to be honest. It's a good and a bad thing, as we were discussing, because sometimes when just an algorithm is influencing things, then it's how you kind of formulate your training data sets, and it might just be nothing, but it's also not adding in bias of variables that you should have looked at. And and like, for example, did you look at the gender of the person, or did you look at the religion, or whatever. I'm just so I think there's a lot of murkiness. And people are grappling with it as the amount of data that has grown, and it's to a point where it's not just about credit scores and such. It's about maps. It's about, it's about oceans. It's about, it's about a lot of things, money laundering. There are so many applications that are completely wanting to be driven by algorithms. And because of that, we have to be very careful. And there's a lot of, and there is country data, and the World Economic Forum, again, I'm talking in the larger scheme of things. People want countries want to share data with other countries. So India has gone into, a pact with Japan, where they said that we are going to be sharing all the data. Japan is going to share the data back. Now you're getting into these kinds of magnitude where the WEF and the governments of the world want to do data exchanges. How, the applications that are defined, the kinds of infrastructure layers that are defined, the kinds of security that is taken, and security, I just, that might even not be as much, but even just thinking about the overall scope of this, what you want to do with it, is something that a lot of international leaders are getting involved in. Are they the right people to get involved? Is a question mark that I have. Just to your point about, should then data scientists, product managers, and really technology people, are we better off doing this? Or should we get different perspectives of the world leaders and and corporate leaders involved? Yeah. Lot of questions. It's a very discussed problem, by the way, right now.
Right.
Countries sharing data, I know why I get calls from China, Chinese calls.
Sumaira, on to something a little bit less depressing than biased data. So as a young entrepreneur, I've read about Coder Bunnies because, I must say that the first time, I was asked to moderate and I asked to speak to all of them. And everybody said, yes, here are the people who are going to be there, and then I call in. And the one thing that they kind of missed telling me is the fact that Sumaira was 11 years old. And so I was like, oh, okay, I'll have to come up with a different set of questions, but not really. I feel like she has an amazing journey. She's created a product. She's an entrepreneur, so she really deserves her seat at the table. So Sumaira, tell us a little bit about, what is it that really clicked in sort of, looking at whatever you wanted to do and thinking that I want to create a product, right? Why didn't you say, let me just go and play with friends? Why did you want to create a product? Tell us.
Yeah, so from a very young age, my dad actually introduced me to coding. It was in a fun way, using a prank that got me really involved in it. And I wanted to create my own things like that. And it turned out that everything he showed me, it involved coding. Now, as a 6-year-old, I had no clue what coding, computer science, what all of that was. But I wondered, it looked really cool to me. So I asked my dad to explain it to me, and he did. He showed me some little basic website that I could start with. And from there, I got really involved in it. I loved coding, and I started talking to my friends about how much I love it. And they were like, I don't really like coding, it's kind of boring or whatever. And I thought, well, why do they think that way? And answering your question, why wouldn't I just go and play? Well, it was something that hurt me. I mean, I loved coding so much, and all these kids, they didn't even like it a bit. I wanted to do something about it. So I thought, what better way to get all kids involved in it than creating a board game? I mean, it's something all kids would love to do, and they can play the game without even knowing that they're learning any concepts of coding, but they actually are learning a lot. So I came up with the idea of creating a board game, teaching kids to code, and I presented it to my parents, and they're like, why don't you do some research about it? And as a kid, I thought that was just a nice way of saying no. But I wanted to do something about it. I wanted to actually create a board game. I had this idea in my head. My parents were telling me, you know what, I did research about it. I found out that creating a board game involved prototyping, playtesting, creating rough sketches, getting in contact with graphic designers, and eventually getting into mass production. And then finally, when I told my parents all this, they're like, okay, you really know what you're talking about. And so they supported me, they helped me get in contact with graphic designers, they supported me on my whole journey, and that's when Coder Bunnies The most comprehensive coding board game ever was created, and from there, it's just gone up.
I'll come back to you. Kripa, I wanted to ask you, which I think will be useful for entrepreneurs here as well. You have a very technical background, right? And you're heading product. What's the magic mix, like as a person with a really heavy technical background wanting to get into leading product? How much should you know about the business? And also, how much is technology important for you to be in that role? Like, how do you think there would be people who can aspire to be, who to lead product with either of those, with both? Like, what's the magic mix?
It's a great question. I'll start with an anecdotal story, and this happened very, very recently, last month. Sometimes we tend to think of ourselves, and most of us are in technology, software backgrounds, and hardware. We tend to think of ourselves as going in, coding, coding away day and night and going back, and then we're delivering a product that's probably AI-oriented, information management-oriented, or all of these things. We tend to see the impact. We don't tend to see the impact that actually those products have beyond when we ship them out, right? We have a customer that is based out of Tennessee, and this was a person who was a local pharmacist, and he had a lot of patients come to him and ask him about buy medicines, and he would recognize the pattern of, because it was a small town, he could recognize the people, he would recognize the pattern of the medicines that they were buying, and he would go out of his way to counsel them and say, you probably should not be having this because I know you have a history of having had that medicine, and so on. So and this gentleman decided to take that a step further and expand his territory beyond his little area and say, I want to found a company that can go in and collect data about the medicines that people are prescribed and what they're using over the counter versus prescription drugs. And then I want to mine that data and look into the patterns and be able to predict risk of somebody having like a heart attack or a stroke or something serious based on that data. And I want to do that beyond my little community of this village. I want to go beyond that and do it. So he had this dream to start a company. He went to his brother, who is an entrepreneur, and said, I want to do this. And ironically, just as they were getting the wheels started to get this company together, unfortunately, this gentleman passed away from a medicine overdose, and that's the irony of it. So the brother goes ahead and starts the company in his memory, in his memory, and they've been using data quite a bit. And they're a big operation now. They're all over the country, and they're a fairly decently big company. And their everyday business is that they mine this data, they predict the patterns, and then they reach out to these patients and say, hey, you're at risk of doing this. And to do that, they have pharmacists that look into the data, and those pharmacists would talk to a technology person, an engineer, and say, hey, can you go run this analysis for me? Can you run these patterns for me and come back and let me know what the data is saying? That cycle would take multiple weeks, and they would come back and they probably will, have somebody at risk, and they'll call that person and say, you need to stop taking this medication or go see your doctor. They switch their technology to using something where, the person that is fluent in understanding the prescriptions starts working with the data, and that's how they're our customer, and that's how I had the privilege of talking to them. And this person was able to find that pattern using the technology that we have without relying on an engineer, and he was able to find that in a few minutes as opposed to weeks. And he was on a call with this patient to let them know that this lady was at risk for a heart attack or a stroke. And while they were on the call, this woman starts slurring, and he detects that she is actually having that stroke while he was on the call. They call emergency services, this person is taken to the hospital, and then unfortunately survives, right? So we tend to look at our jobs as building technology or algorithms and coding and so on, but the impact that it has in this particular case, saving somebody's life, because if they had relied on that process to take weeks as opposed to the few minutes that it took for them to do it, they would not have caught her on that call and been able to save that life. Where I want to go with this is the key essence to going into a product management type role or product leadership role or being an entrepreneur is to look at that need beyond the technology that is an enabler for that solution, right? We have a ton of great technology that enables us to do all of these things. As entrepreneurs, 20 years ago, one of the main things that you would have to overcome or when you're ideating something is to build the infrastructure that can help you solve your problem. You have to go procure servers, set up the network, set up storage and so on. Now you can go with a few clicks, set something up on the cloud, and you will be up and running, and you can focus on solving your problem. With all that power, look beyond the technology into what you're delivering. And a lot of us from an engineering background tend to miss that. We tend to look into this is the latest coding utility and so on, but engaging with the right people, understanding the impact, understanding what it really means to a person that's using it, changes your mind. And then once you're able to empathize with what that need is and what difference it can make, then you can do wonders with the power that you have to build the technology.
So passion for the product, for
empathy for the user of the product and what they would really benefit from.
Right. Samira, I want to ask you a little bit of a follow-up in terms of end users and using your product. So when you first sort of came up with the idea, did you get people to play with it? What did you do? What did you kind of decide, what's the final point where I want to stop and go into production?
Yeah, so originally I had a few prototypes in hand after I did rough sketches, got in contact with graphic designers, and then I had a few of the actual games. And I started playing with people like my friends, my brother, and I thought this was really cool. But I also wanted to teach more kids than just my brother, just my friends. So I told it to my mom, and she was like, okay, why don't you do workshops? So as a 7-year-old kid, I thought workshops were things where you sort of went to places like Home Depot and you build things out of wood, like birdhouses. And I'm like, why would I want to do a workshops? I want to teach kids how to play my game, not build things out of wood. It turns out the workshops my mom was talking about was actually the ones where you go and you teach people about something you are good at. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. So I went to a few libraries close by and I presented them with my idea of a board game that teaches kids how to code. And so they were like, why don't you come back next year? Or we have online coding programs. So this made me feel maybe my game isn't that good. But I didn't give up. I went to more and more libraries until finally the Santa Clara Central Park Library, they loved the idea. They wanted to do workshops right away. And so that made me feel, okay, maybe my game is worth it. And so from there, I've done hundreds of workshops, teaching thousands and thousands of kids. And since I started doing more and more workshops, more and more people started asking me where they could buy the game. And I was like, I don't really know. I mean, I'm just sort of doing this for fun as a side passion to get my friends excited about coding. But they were like, oh, that's a bummer. I would really like to buy this for my kid, or I think my kid could really benefit from this. And as more and more people started telling me that, I thought, okay, maybe it's time to go into mass production. And from there, I did many dry runs, and eventually we got it to sell on Amazon. And before we knew it, it trended #1 there out of all of the board games on Amazon. Thank you.
So you can do a little plug. Where can we buy it now?
Yeah, so you can buy it on Amazon. Just search up Coder Bunnies, or for my artificial intelligence board game, it's actually the world's first ever artificial intelligence board game, Coder Minds. Just search up Coder Minds.
So I want to sort of pivot a little bit to talking about Okay, well, we'll address the elephant in the room before we close. How about that? So Preeti, I'll start with you because we talked about this a little while ago. You know, I was talking to some folks in Women in Product, which is a nonprofit that is being created by 2 senior women from Facebook. And the numbers that they were quoting in terms of how few women was dismal, but also in terms of how the environment in companies are simply really difficult for women to sort of take that step, get into leadership, and all of those associated things. Talk a little bit about that as a woman who has been in leadership and moved forward. What would you tell young women who really want to make a career in product, like our young entrepreneur here perhaps, but are really looking at the stories and the data and thinking that I really don't want to be there?
So I truly believe that for more women to be recognized and grow in technology, it takes a village. And what I mean by that is, I'll tell you my personal story. How I got to where I am today is because of the support I've received. And of course, it is primarily what I was looking to become. It was my vision. But the amount of support I got from my mom, from my husband, and from my coach, and several others who have surrounded me and encouraged me whenever I had a fall, or cheered me whenever I had a success, that has been paramount for me to charge ahead and move forward, right? So forming my ecosystem of supporters has been my primary way by which I have stayed on track. And I wish I knew this when I was growing up, because it took me at least maybe 10 years, or maybe like about 8 years at least, being in my career to realize that is one of the primary things that I need to do. So certainly that is one thing, and I think Samara is already doing that. We have so many supporters here for her already, right? And so that is one big thing. And number 2, what I did was I went inward. To shine outward. This is for not just women, it's for everybody, right? To recognize who you are, to get that passion and that purpose to actually go inward. And that's actually a never-ending answer, because you always find that you discover a certain passion, certain purpose, and after 5 years or so, that's my 3 to 5 years, I find I'm looking at something else. But to keep going going inward again and again, and I meditate every day, and that's been my way of going back inward and getting that intuition from within me on what really I want to focus on. That's been another thing that I think will help both young men and women to really truly get their calling and become who they truly are as a person.
I want to open it to some audience questions. If not, we'll just continue, but any questions from the audience you want to ask? Yep.
So, as you move in your career, what is more important, fit or the opportunity itself? By fit, what I mean is finding a team that's a good fit for the way you work, your style, versus opportunity is an opportunity, like a flashy opportunity where you can, it looks good on your resume, and it's a good opportunity to take. What matters more?
Personally, the number one thing for me when I took this job, my first question to myself is passion. Will I wake up every morning and want to come to this? Will it be happy Monday or happy Friday for me? That was my first question. And the second question is, are these the people I want to spend 80% of my day with? Which is what it happens, right? So the team for me is more important. Because we can be in whatever team that supports us, we can be in a role that you can start in a role that might not be flashy, but if you're with the right team, you get there very fast. That would be my thing. And the third was that whole good title, pay and everything. That's my third criteria.
It's a great question. I think fit is definitely the most important. With the right team, sometimes you think that you've nailed the opportunity and you know what the problem is. With the right team to back you up, you'll be able to refine that even further, and maybe there's a bigger opportunity that you missed your sight on when you started out. Right? The right team is very, very important, and for most of us in leadership positions, it's important to hire the right talent. I don't have an eye for design at all. The designer on my team, he's brilliant. He's amazing. So for me to pretend that I can do and tell him what to do is absolute disaster, right? Letting him shine and be able to promote that is very, very important. And I truly believe with the right team, you can expand that opportunity potentially into something even bigger.
Any other questions? No?
I think as I understood the question, fit versus a good opportunity. I think they're not sort of divorced from each other. It's one leads to the other. If it's a good fit, then any opportunity you can shine. But I obviously agree with both my panelists here that you have to be fit. It's a very gender agnostic question, and I think that's what it was meant to be. I do think sometimes in life, though, and I'm going to take a bit of a rogue approach in this. You have to have, you just have to have a risk-taking appetite for something that might not be the right fit for you from day one, but it's the right opportunity, and you feel like it is going to help you get to the next thing that might be the best fit for you, and you can't get there, and so you have to take those risks. The risks have to be mitigated. I do think that, and I've done some of those myself, and it's not comfortable. And I think one of the biggest things that all of us need to get comfortable as entrepreneurs in this room is to get very comfortable with, uncertainty, risk, not feeling like a fit at all, not feeling like you have the right team, not feeling like anyone gets what you do around you. And what needs to be done, that's part of what entrepreneurship really is. And I think that many of us who have taken decisions to go out and do things have not done it because it's the right fit necessarily, but it's because the opportunity is right. And so, how do you kind of, ease into that? It's not something that you should shirk away from. And when you need to take those risks, you must just take it. And fit, therefore, is important, but you need to kind of ease into the fit and think about the opportunity first.
Thank you all. I want to wrap. Sorry, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question for Samya. So, I have two questions. How big is your team? And the question is, how much money did you raise from your dad?
So right now my team consists of my mom, my dad, my brother, the people who make the board game, so the graphic designers, the manufacturers, the Amazon team who prepares the game and things like that to actually send it out. Everyone in my family has a special role. My dad, he's the advisor. He supports me. He's the one who actually introduced me to coding. My mom, she's the marketer overall. She helps me reach out, get so many amazing opportunities, just like this one. My brother, he's the play tester for every level I've ever had in any of my games. He's tested all of them. And I'm the founder. I'm the CEO and founder. And for your second question, basically all of the seed money to actually make my game, it came from my family. So I don't know the exact amount. My mom takes care of those sort of logistics.
It's a very good problem to have.
But I do know that the seed money came from my family, my parents. And now I've seen that many of the profits I'm making, they've gone back. So it's evened out, and I'm starting to make profits out of my game, which is really cool as well.
Samir, I hear you talk and you refer to kids as other kids. We look at you as kids too, right? So do you feel like you're left out, or do you feel lonely?
I do not. I have friends at school. I would feel that I am a little different, meaning I have an idea and I want to bring it out to everybody, every child in the world. But I feel like they're just one of me. I mean, I feel it's the easiest that I do the work, because from a kid to kid, when I'm the one who does the workshops, I'm the one who does the talks, and it's easier for other kids to relate, which is why I do all these things. So I want other kids to relate like I'm just another kid.
What's the next business plan?
Parents here?
My mom and my brother are here.
I think you should call a team here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Samira's mom. And she referred to her brother as a very important person as well. So I want to wrap by saying what I said right in the beginning, which is that, when we talk of women in tech, women really prefer to think of themselves as technologists, right, and not so much as women technologists. So in that spirit, I'd love to see panels where women are part of it. Perhaps next time GTEN conferences happen, women are part of the technology panels as opposed to having a women in tech session. But I'd love to do this anyway. You did? This year? Okay, maybe next time. Thank you, women. Awesome.